Hello, welcome to another lesson on literary terms and terminologies. In our last video, we had successfully done a good number of literary terms, of which I promised you that we are going to conclude this topic in your next video. Now, let's begin this session by talking about another important literary term, and it is known as the parable. The parable is a succinct and didactic story in prose that illustrates one or more instructive lessons or principle. Now, it is very important to know that the major aim of every parable is to communicate a didactic content. Didactic there means having a sense of moral lesson. When a story is didactic, it means that you can learn one or two lessons or stories by listening or watching to that work. Now, parables is very important to note that they are fictions in nature. When we talk about fiction, we are telling you about those stories that only exist in the imaginations of the writer or the speaker. If you must take the parables in the Holy Bible for an example, the parables told by Jesus Christ during his earthly ministry, he had likened the kingdom of God to some certain earthly stories or events. He had also likened the love of God for man to some earthly, of course, stories yet again. Even when he talked about God's love and love for one another, he had likened his love for human nature to some mundane stories. All these were aimed at buttressing his points to the understanding of his listeners. It is very important to note that the stories in a parable are only fictions, as they do not exist in real life, but they only communicate and exist in the mind of the reader. Another literary term is catharsis. Catharsis is a strong emotional feeling of pity, as well as the process of releasing them in order to provide relief from these strong emotional feelings. Now, that feeling of pity and fear of which members of the audience develop as a result of watching any tragic play is called catharsis, the purging of the feeling. You will notice that clearly when members of the audience watch any tragic play, they feel emotional. That emotion could be that of pity and yet again that of fear. These feelings, as well as its portion, is what you call catharsis. Another literary term is the Anna. The Anna is a book that contains the major sayings and quotations of a popular person. Any book that contains the quotations, the sayings, the major articulations and statements of a very popular person is what you call an Anna. A very important one is the one compiled and put forward by the former president of Nigeria, President Goodluck Jonathan, and it is titled Goodluck Jonathan on the Marble, No Enemy to Fight. In that book, it contains the major sayings of this man in every occasion of which he had attended, that had of which contributed to the formation and establishment of this man. Another example is the one titled Trumpets of Revolution, which contains the sayings of Caesura, of which is a major economic and social activist in Nigeria. If you look at another one compiled by David Lube, it's titled Dictionary of Powerful Quotations and Biographical Information. It contains the major sayings of people across several forums and disciplines. This type of literary work is known as the Anna. Now, the next literary term is a burlesque. A burlesque is a literary, dramatic, or musical work intended to cause laughter by caricaturing the manner or spirit of serious works or by ludicrous treatment of their subjects. When we talk about a burlesque, we are simply referring to a work of art that comically imitates another serious work. Therefore, in a burlesque, people will always watch or read it and then will eventually laugh because it caricatures another serious work. A traceable example is a poem titled Strungnell Sonnet, written by Wendy Cope, of which she caricatured another poem written by William Shakespeare titled Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day. If you look at these two poems, you will notice that the majority of the lines in these works of art are almost similar, except that in Wendy Cope's Strong-Nail sonnet, she comically imitated Shakespeare's sonnet. And you will see, if I should quote the first two lines, the first line of Shakespeare's poem says, "Had we but in marriage and true minds admit impediment." Wendy Cope says, "Had we in marriage of true swines admit impediment." As she went on and on, she comically represented these serious work. Therefore, Cope's Strong-Nail sonnet is a burlesque because the work of art is humorously and comically, or perhaps caricaturing, the serious work by Shakespeare. Another literary term is tragic flaw. Tragic flaw is often associated with great tragedy. Tragic flaw is that weakness in the tragic hero which causes him to initiate an action that will culminate to his downfall or death. Another name for tragic flaw is hamature or hubris. We have said this when we talked about drama and its subgenres. When we mentioned tragedy, we said that the tragic hero will always possess a weakness that will cause him to do something of which will eventually culminate to his death. That weakness is termed hamature or hubris. Every tragic hero, according to the Aristotelian concept of tragedy, must always possess a weakness in the midst of all his strengths. But this weakness will eventually outshadow his strength, causing him to do something that will land him in his downfall. Another literary term is Hendiadys. An Hendiadys is the expression of a single idea by two words connected with an, when one could be used to modify the other. Now, when we say that Hendiadys is used, one thing should come to the mind of the listener, and that is the coordinating conjunction and. And is always used to link two terms which one would have been modifying the other. In the example on the screen is titled nice and warm. Nice and warm. You can say the meal is nice and warm, or she gave me a nice and warm meal. But the truth of which, in grammar, it would have been better to say nicely warm, and that would have been okay. But literature will always make some techniques or concepts to make the creativity showcase. So these two terms linked up with an, nice and warm, to describe any concept is what you call Hendiadys. Now, another literary term we are going to be looking at is tercet. Tercet, also known as triplet, is a group of 3 lines of verse rhyming together or connected by rhyme. Again, a poem of 3 lines could also be called tercet. When you say the word tercet in prose, in poems specifically, you are looking at 3 lines of a poem rhyming together. Or else, you can say that a poem that has 3 lines is called the tercet. You can also say the first tercet of a poem or the last tercet, which means the first 3 or the last 3 lines of a poem. Another literary term is the quatrain. As opposed to couplet tercet, quatrain, as the name implies, is from the term quarter or quadruple, which means 4. It is a stanza of 4 lines, especially one having alternative rhymes. When you talk about the first quatrain of a poem or the last quatrain, you're referring to yet again the first or last 4 lines of a poem. Quatrain is connected to 4, and it means a poem of 4 lines or a line of poetry which comes in 4 rhyming patterns. Another literary term we are going to look at is an archetype. In literature, this is a model of characters who share a similar feature of others in social contexts, sometimes economic or even political situations. Therefore, an archetypal character is one model character which represents the experience of every other person in that socio-cultural or economic milieu. Now, a typical example of an archetypal character is the protagonist in a novel titled Native Son, put forward by Richard Wright. That man is Bigger Thomas. In that novel, we saw Bigger Thomas, a 20-year-old young man who was so frustrated in an extreme racist society of America of the 20th century. This man had a lot of dreams, but these dreams were frustrated because of the system. We can also see that in the introduction of that novel, Richard Wright stated clearly that Bigger Thomas in Native Son is an archetypal character that represents the experiences and the ordeals of every young American boy at the time. And he stated again that all Bigger Thomases of America at the time has been fused into the Bigger Thomas of Native Son. Now, you will agree yet again that what you saw Bigger Thomas did in that novel is exactly what every African American boy of that age at the time would do. Therefore, an archetypal character always explains and acts out or even expresses the experiences of such people in that particular context. Another example of an archetypal character is the protagonist in a novel written by Bayo Adebowale and is titled Lonely Days. I'm talking about the widow Yaremi. In the African context, you will agree that widows are always the neglected people, especially in pre-colonial Africa. They are always seen as soulless. They depend on men for survival. Therefore, the character of Yaremi was an archetypal one, representing the experiences of every widow. He talks about what widows go through, the funeral rites, the widow's rights, and every form of ill-humane treatment meted on the African widow. So, that character that is a model character of which representing the experiences of so many in that particular context is what you refer to as an archetypal character. Some characters are not archetypal, while some others are. Another literary term is the prologue. The prologue is a separate introductory section of a literary, dramatic, or musical work. Its opposite is the epilogue, which means that the epilogue is the concluding part of a literary work. The prologue, we will say, is a bit separate from the literary work, as it introduces or gives an insight or a hint into what the readers may likely be expecting in the work. The epilogue, on the other hand, is that separate part of the work that comes in the end, that of which concludes or even summarizes what may not actually be contained in the literary work. In some cases, you will see that a play or a work of art ends in a note that is not entertaining to the audience. It ends in a way that evokes a sense of anger, of which we will see the writer persuading and justifying his or her reasons in the prologue, in the epilogue, I beg your pardon. So the prologue introduces the work, it comes before the work begins. The epilogue concludes it, summarizes, and even justifies the reason for some actions taken in the work of art. Lastly, the next literary term is the caesura. The caesura is a strong break between words within a metrical foot. It is usually denoted with full stop sign. When we talk about that strong break in a line of poetry, we are referring to it as a caesura and not full stop as to be used in grammar. Therefore, what the full stop serves in grammar is simply what caesura does in poetry. The only difference is nomenclature, even though they both mean the same thing. Some lines of poetry may not even have caesuras, but immediately you notice them, the poet, of course, expects the readers to have a strong break, and that term is known as the caesura. We have so far looked at the majority and the most important literary terms as used in literature, As we will be seeing, we will be practicalizing these terms as we are going through this series. I am very interested to expose you to high-level aspects of literary texts, literary terms, as we will eventually explore in this video. Thank you very much.